Hey! This is an ASMR video. You're supposed to whisper. Okay, so today I thought I would do a short story reading of Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's literally 1,000 pages long. So I'm just going to pick a couple of short stories here. And we'll go through those. So, first one I'm gonna read is The Telltale Heart, which was in a Simpsons episode. I don't know if you've seen that, but The Simpsons was literally my childhood, so I'm gonna read this. It's only 5 pages long, and the next story is called Diddling. And I don't know if that's in the context that I'm thinking of it as, but that's a story that exists. Anyway, we're gonna read The Telltale Heart now. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I shall tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him, and every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently, and then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly. Yes, slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was as well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just as much so that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye was closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So, you see, he would have been very profound, old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he did not even dream of my secret deed or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no, his room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was a low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening, within its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind of the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or is it merely a cricket which has made a single chirp?" Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked him with black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at last a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and full upon the vulture's eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all the dull blue, with the hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon my eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am, and now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled a heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be hard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence, for of all I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. When I had made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to this chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chattered of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distant. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued to gain definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by fury, by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all, and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly, and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of this horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I thought that I must scream or die. And now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tap the planks. Here it is, the beating of his hideous heart. Ooh, that's it. That was the end of the story. Okay, I think we're gonna do one more story here. I'll find another short one. So this next one is Eleonora. It's another short one. It's only 6 pages long. I don't know why I picked this one. I guess I just like the name Eleonora. I am come of a race noted for vigor of fancy and ardor of passion. Men have called me mad, but the question is not yet settled, whether madness is or is not the loftiest intelligence, whether much that is glorious, whether all that is profound, does not spring from disease of thought, from moods of minds exalted at the expense of the general intellect. Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape those who dream only by night. In their grey visions, they obtain glimpses of eternity and thrill in waking, to find that they have been upon the verge of the great secret. In snatches they learn something of the wisdom which is of good, and more of the mere knowledge which is of evil. They penetrate, however, rudderless or compassionless, into the vast ocean of the light ineffable, and again, like the adventures of the Nubian geographer, aggressisset mer tenebraeum quid in el esset explorator. We will say, then, that I am mad. I grant, at least, that there are 2 distinct conditions of my mental existence. The condition of a lucid reason, not to be disputed, and belonging to the memory of events forming the first epoch of my life. and of condition of shadow and doubt, appertaining to the present and to the recollection of what constitutes the second great era of my being. Therefore, what I shall tell of the earlier period believe, and to what I may retaliate of the later time, give only such credit as may seem due, or if doubt it ye cannot, then play unto its riddle the Oedipus. She whom I loved in youth, and of whom I now pen calmly and distinctly these remembrances, was the sole daughter of the only sister of my mother long departed. Eleanora was the name of my cousin. We had always dwelt together, beneath the tropical sun in the valley of the many-colored grass. No unguided footsteps ever came upon that vale, for it lay far away among a range of giant hills that hung beetling about it, shutting out the sunlight from its sweetest recesses. No path was trodden in its victory, and to reach our happy home there was need of putting back with force the foliage of many thousands of forest trees, and of crushing the death of glories of many millions of fragrant flowers. Thus it was that we lived all alone, knowing nothing of this world without the valley, I and my cousin and her mother. From the dim regions beyond the mountains at the upper end of our encircled domain, there crept out a narrow and deep river, brighter than all save the eyes of Eleanora, and winding stealthily about in mazy courses, it passed away at length through a shadowy gorge among hills still dimmer than those whence it had issued. We called it the River of Silence, for there seemed to be a hushing influence in its flow. No murmur arose from its bed, and so gently it wandered along that the pearly pebbles upon which we loved to gaze, far down within its bosom, stirred not at all, but lay in a motionless content, each in its own station, shining on gloriously forever. The margin of the river, and of so many dazzling rivulets that glided through devious ways into its channel, as well as the spaces that extended from the margins away down into the depths of the streams until they reached the bed of pebbles at the bottom. These spots, not less than the whole surface of the valley, from the river of the mountains that girdled it in, were carpeted all by a soft green grass, thick, short, perfectly even, and vanilla perfumed, but so besprinkled throughout with the yellow buttercup, the white daisy, the purple violet, and the ruby red asphodel, and its exceeding beauty spoke to our hearts in loud tones of the love and of the glory of God. And here and there, in groves about this grass, like wildernesses of dreams, sprang up fantastic trees, whose tall slender stems stood not upright but slanted gracefully toward the light that peered at noonday into the center of the valley. Their bark was speckled with the vivid alternate splendor of ebony and silver, and was smoother than all save the cheeks of Eleanora, so that, but for the brilliant green of the huge leaves that spread from their summits in long, tremulous lines, dallying with the zephyrs, one might have fancied them giant serpents of Syria doing homage to their sovereign, the sun. Hand in hand, about this valley, for 15 years I roamed with Eleanora before love entered within our hearts. It was one evening at the close of the 3rd lustrum of her life, and of the 4th of my own, that we sat locked in each other's embrace beneath the serpent-like trees, and looked down within the waters of the River of Silence at our images therein. We spoke no words during the rest of that sweet day, and our words even upon the morrow were tremulous and few. We had drawn the god Eros from that wave, and now we felt that he had enkindled us within the fiery souls of our forefathers. The passions which had for centuries distinguished our race came thronging with the fancies of which they had been equally noted, and together breathed a delirious bliss over the valley of the many-colored grass. A change fell upon all things. Strange, brilliant flowers, star-shaped, burst out upon trees where no flowers had been known before. The tints of the green carpet deepened, and when, one by one, the white daisies shrank away, there sprang up in place of them, 10 by 10, of the ruby red asphodel, and life arose in our paths. For the tall flamingo, hitherto unseen, with all gay glowing birds, flaunted his scarlet plumage before us. The golden and silver fish haunted the river, out of the bosom of which issued, little by little, a murmur that swelled at length into a lulling melody, more divine than that of the harp of Elis, sweeter than all save the voice of Eleanora. And now, too, a voluminous cloud, which we had long watched in the regions of Hesper, floated out thence all gorgeous in crimson and gold, and settling in peace above us, sank day by day lower and lower, until its edges rested upon the tops of the mountains, turning all their dimness into magnificence, and shutting us up as if forever within a magic prison house of grandeur and of glory. The loveliness of Eleanora was that of the seraphim, but she was a maiden artless and innocent, and the brief life she had led among the flowers, no guile disguised the fervour of love which animated her heart, and she examined with me its most recesses as we walked together in the valley of the many-coloured glass, and discoursed of the mighty changes which had taken place therein. At length, having spoken one day, in tears of the last sad change which must befall humanity, she thenceforth dwelt only upon this one sorrowful theme, interweaving it into all our converse. As in the songs of the Bard of Shiraz, the same images are found occurring, again and again, in every impressive variation of phrase. She had seen that the finger of death was upon her bosom, that, like the ephemeron, she had been made perfect in loveliness only to die, but the terrors of the grave to lay solely in a consideration which she revealed to me one evening at twilight by the banks of the river of silence. She grieved to think that, having entombed her in the valley of the many-coloured grass, I would quit forever its happy recesses, transferring the love which now was so passionately her own to some maiden of the outer and everyday world. And then and there I threw myself hurriedly at the feet of Eleanora, and offered up a vow to herself and to heaven that I would never bind myself to marriage to any daughter of earth, that I would in no manner prove recreant to her dear memory, or to the memory of the mighty ruler of the universe. To witness the pious solemnity of my vow, and the curse which I invoked of him and of her, a saint in illusion, should I prove traitors to that promise, involved a penalty that exceeding a great horror, of which will not permit me to make record of it here. And the bright eyes of Eleanora grew brighter at my words, and she sighed as if a deadly burthen had been taken from her breast, and she trembled and very bitterly wept, but she made acceptance of the vow, for what was she but a child, and it made easy to her the bed of her death. And she said to me, not many days afterward, tranquilly dying, that because of what I had done for her to comfort her spirit, she would watch over me in the spirit when departed, and, if so it were permitted, her return to me visibly in the watches of the night. But if this thing were indeed beyond the power of the souls in paradise, that she would at least give me frequent indications of her presence, sighing upon me in the evening winds, or filling the air which I breathed with perfume from the censers of the angles. And, with these words upon her lips, she yielded up her innocent life, putting an end to the first epoch of my own. Thus far I have faithfully said, but as I pass the barrier in time's path, formed by the death of my beloved, and proceed with the second era of my existence, I feel that a shadow gathers over my brain. I mistrust the perfect sanity of the record, but let me on. Years drag themselves along heavily, and still I dwell within the valley of the many-coloured grass. But a second change had come upon all things. The star-shaped flowers shrank into the stems of the trees, and appeared no more. The taints of the green carpet faded, and one by one the ruby-red asphodels withered away, and there sprang up in place of them, 10 by 10, dark eye-like violets, that writhed uneasily, and were ever encumbered with dew. And life departed from our paths, for the tall flamingo flaunted no longer his scarlet plumage before us, but flew sadly from the vale into the hills with all the gay glowing birds that had arrived in his company. And the golden and silver fish swam through the gorge at the lower end of our domain, and bedecked the sweet river, never again. And the lulling melody that had been softer than the wild harp of Aelus, and more divine than all save the voice of Eleanora, it died little by little away, its murmurs growing lower and lower, until the stream returned at length, utterly in the solemnity of its original silence. And then lastly, the voluminous cloud uprose, and abandoning the tops of the mountains to the dimness of old, fell back into the regions of Hesper, and took away all its manifold, golden and gorgeous glories from the valley of the many-coloured grass. Yet the promises of Eleanor were not forgotten, for I heard the sounds of the swinging of the censers of the angels, and streams of the holy perfume floated ever and ever about the valley. And at lone hours, when my heart beat heavily, the winds that bathed my brow came unto me laden with soft sighs, and indistinct murmurs filled often the night air. And once, oh but once only, I was awakened from slumber, like the slumber of death, but the pressing of spiritual lips upon my own. But the void within my heart refused, even thus to be filled. I longed for the love which had before filled it to overflowing. At length the valley pained me through its memories of Eleanor, and I left it forever, for the vanities and the turbulent triumphs of the world. I found myself within a strange city, where all things might have served to blot from recollection the sweet dreams I had dreamed so long in the valley of the many-coloured grass. The pomps and pageantries of the stately court, and the mad clangor of arms, and the radiant loveliness of women, bewildered and intoxicated my brain, but yet my soul had proven true to its vows, and the indications of the presence of Eleanor were still given to me in silent hours of the night. Suddenly, these manifestations they ceased, and the world grew dark before mine eyes, and stood aghast at the burning thoughts which possessed the terrible temptations which beset me. For there came, from some far, far distant and unknown land, into the gay court of the king I served, a maiden to whose beauty my whole recreant heart yielded at once, at whose footstool I bowed down without a struggle, in the most ardent and the most abject worship of love, which indeed was my passion for the young girl of the valley in comparison with the fervour and the delirium and the spirit-lifting ecstasy of adoration, with which I poured out my whole soul in tears at the feet of the ethereal Ermengarde. O bright was the seraph Ermengarde, and in that knowledge I had room for no other. O divine was the angel Ermengarde, and as I looked down into the depths of her memorial eyes, I thought only of them, and of her. I wedded, not dreaded, the curse I had invoked, and its bitterness was not visited upon me, and once, but once again, in the silence of the night, there came through my lattice the soft sighs which have forsaken me, and they modelled themselves into familiar and sweet voice, saying, Sleep in peace, for the spirit of love reigneth and ruleth, and in taking to thy passionate heart, who is Ermengarde, thou art absolved, for reasons which shall be made known to thee in heaven, of thy vows unto Eleanor.